Captain Marcus Chen had seen many strange things during his 15 years patrolling the Outer Rim territories, but nothing quite like the woman who appeared on his ship's sensors 3 weeks ago. The readings were impossible. A single life form drifting in the void of space without any vessel, yet somehow alive and breathing in the vacuum that should have killed any known species instantly. When his crew brought her aboard the merchant vessel Stellar Dawn, she was conscious but refused to remove the strange metallic mask that covered the upper half of her face. The mask seemed to be made from a material that didn't appear in any of their databases. It shifted colors like liquid mercury, but held its shape perfectly. Through the eye holes, Marcus could see glimpses of what looked like normal human eyes, though they glowed with a faint blue light in certain angles of illumination. She called herself Lyra and spoke perfect Standard Galactic, though with an accent Marcus couldn't place. Her lower face was beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten, full lips that curved into smiles that seemed to hold secrets, and skin that had a subtle luminescence like moonlight on water. She was tall and graceful, moving through the ship's corridors as if she had been born to navigate the artificial gravity of spacecraft. Marcus found himself drawn to her in ways that surprised him. He was a practical man, a trader, who dealt in facts and figures and cargo manifests. Romance had never been a priority when there were routes to plan and profits to calculate. But something about Lyra made him want to abandon his carefully ordered life and follow her to whatever strange corner of the galaxy she had emerged from. The crew was suspicious at first. Chief Engineer Rodriguez muttered about picking up strays and the bad luck that came from helping mysterious strangers in space. Communications Officer Park ran every scan she could think of, trying to determine what species Lyra belonged to. The results were contradictory and strange. Sometimes the scanners read her as human, sometimes as something else entirely, and occasionally they couldn't detect her at all, even when she was standing right in front of them. Lyra seemed amused by their efforts to understand her. She would watch them work with a tilted head, like a cat observing the futile efforts of mice. When Marcus asked direct questions about her origins, she would deflect with humor or change the subject entirely. The only thing she ever said about her past was that she had been waiting for the right ship to find her, and that she needed passage to the Kepler station in the Vanguard sector. The journey to Kepler station would take 2 weeks through hyperspace, with several stops at trading posts along the way. Marcus found himself looking forward to the time, hoping he could convince Lyra to trust him enough to share her secrets. During the long hours between jump points, they would sit in the observation deck and watch the stars wheel by in the strange compressed patterns that hyperspace created around their bubble of normal space-time. Lyra had an encyclopedic knowledge of stellar cartography that impressed even Marcus, who had been navigating these routes for over a decade. She could identify star systems by the color and intensity of their light, recite the orbital periods of planets he had never heard of, and predict with uncanny accuracy when they would encounter spatial anomalies that might affect their passage through hyperspace. "How do you know so much about the galaxy?" Marcus asked during one of their late-night conversations. Lyra's finger traced patterns on the metal table between them, leaving faint glowing trails that faded after a few seconds. "I have had a long time to study it," she said softly. "Longer than you might imagine." There was something in her voice that made Marcus think of vast expanses of time, of patience beyond human comprehension. He reached across the table and touched her hand. Her skin was warm but felt somehow distant, as if there were layers of meaning beneath the simple contact that he couldn't begin to understand. "Why do you hide your face?" he asked, the question that had been building in him since the day they found her. Lyra's hand stilled under his. For a moment, the faint luminescence in her skin seemed to dim. "Some questions are dangerous to answer, Marcus. Some truths change everything." "I'm not afraid of the truth," Marcus said, though something deep in his chest suggested that might not be entirely accurate. Lyra looked at him then with those strange, glowing eyes visible through the mask's openings. "Perhaps you should be," she whispered. "Perhaps you should be afraid that once you know what I really am, you will stop loving me." The word loving hung in the air between them like a confession neither of them had been prepared to make. Marcus felt his heart racing as he realized that somehow, impossibly, he had fallen in love with this mysterious woman who had materialized from the void. The logical part of his mind screamed warnings about the dangers of emotional attachment to someone whose very existence defied explanation, but his heart had already made its decision. That night, Marcus lay awake in his captain's quarters, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what was happening to him. In 3 days, they would reach Kepler Station, and Lyra would disappear from his life as suddenly as she had entered it. The thought filled him with a desperate urgency to understand her, to convince her that whatever secret she was hiding couldn't be worse than losing her entirely. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Communications Officer Park burst into the bridge with readings that made no sense according to everything they knew about physics and space travel. Long-range sensors had detected a massive fleet approaching their position, ships that registered on their instruments as being larger than anything in the known databases, moving at speeds that should have been impossible even with the most advanced hyperspace engines. What made the readings even more disturbing was that the ships appeared to be following their exact trajectory, matching their course changes with precision that suggested they had been tracking the stellar dawn for some time. Marcus studied the sensor data with growing alarm, recognizing the implications even if he couldn't understand the technology behind it. Lyra appeared on the bridge without warning, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the ship's gravity generators. She studied the tactical display for a moment, and Marcus saw her shoulders tense beneath the simple gray jumpsuit she wore. "They found me," she said quietly, and there was something in her voice that made the temperature on the bridge seem to drop several degrees. "I had hoped for more time." "Who found you?" Marcus demanded. But even as he asked the question, he could see the answer forming in Lyra's posture. The way she held herself had changed subtly, as if she were preparing for a battle that had been inevitable from the beginning. The approaching fleet began transmitting on frequencies that their communications array could barely detect. The messages were not in any known language, but something about the rhythmic patterns made Marcus think of commands being issued, of a vast intelligence coordinating movements across impossible distances. As he listened to the alien transmissions, he began to understand that his mysterious passenger was not the helpless refugee he had assumed her to be. Lyra turned to face him, and through the mask's eye holes, he could see that the blue glow in her eyes had intensified. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. "There are things about me that you need to know. Things about what I am and why these ships have come for me. But once I tell you the truth, everything will change between us. Are you certain you want to know?" Marcus looked at her standing there on his bridge, beautiful and terrible and completely alien despite her human appearance. Behind her, the tactical display showed the approaching fleet growing larger with each passing moment. He realized that he was standing at a crossroads, not just in his own life, but in the history of human space exploration. Whatever Lyra was hiding, it was important enough to bring an entire armada across the galaxy to find her. "Tell me," he said, knowing that his life as a simple merchant captain was about to end forever. "Tell me everything." Lyra's hands moved to the edges of her metallic mask, and Marcus held his breath as she slowly began to lift it away from her face. The moment the mask cleared her features, the bridge of the stellar dawn filled with a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Marcus staggered backward, his vision overwhelmed by patterns of luminescence that his human eyes could barely process. Where Lyra's face should have been, there was something that defied every assumption Marcus had made about biology and physics. Her features were there, the curve of cheekbones, the arch of eyebrows, the familiar eyes he had been falling in love with, but they existed as constructs of pure energy contained within a framework that looked like living starlight. Geometric patterns flowed across her skin like circuit boards made from captured nebulae, and when she spoke, her voice harmonized with frequencies that made the ship's hull vibrate in sympathy. "I am what your species would call an energy being," Lyra said, her words creating visible ripples in the air around them. "My people evolved beyond physical matter millions of years ago, but we maintained an interest in the younger races scattered throughout the galaxy. I was sent to observe humanity's expansion into space, to determine whether your species possessed the qualities necessary for elevation to the next phase of galactic civilization." Marcus tried to speak, but found that his voice had abandoned him entirely. The woman he had fallen in love with was not a woman at all, but something so far beyond human understanding that his mind struggled to accept what his eyes were showing him. Yet even as shock and confusion warred in his thoughts, he realized that his feelings for her had not changed. If anything, seeing her true nature only made him more aware of the impossible gift he had been given in knowing her. Chief Engineer Rodriguez had stumbled into the bridge just as Lyra revealed herself, and he stood frozen in the doorway with tools scattered around his feet. Communications Officer Park was frantically trying to record sensor readings while her equipment sparked and overloaded from proximity to Lyra's unveiled energy field. The normal routines of ship operations had collapsed into chaos as the crew struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. "The fleet approaching us," Marcus managed to say, his voice hoarse with strain. "They're your people?" Lyra's expression shifted, and the patterns of light flowing across her features darkened. "They are the collective, the governing body of energy beings who believe that contact with physical species is dangerous and corrupting. When I failed to report back according to schedule, they sent a retrieval force to bring me home for judgment." The tactical display showed the alien fleet had closed to within weapons range, though their instruments couldn't identify what form those weapons might take. The lead ships were broadcasting increasingly urgent transmissions in the harmonic language that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to the nervous system. Marcus could feel the messages pressing against his consciousness, like whispered threats in an unknown tongue. "What will happen if they take you?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I will be disconnected from this form and reintegrated into the collective consciousness," Lyra said. "Everything that I have become through my interactions with your species will be absorbed and analyzed, then discarded as contamination. The individual that you have come to know will cease to exist." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not only would he lose Lyra, but humanity's first contact with an advanced alien civilization would end with one of their representatives being essentially executed for the crime of developing feelings for a human being. The injustice of it ignited something fierce and protective in his chest, a reaction that surprised him with its intensity. "There has to be another option," Marcus said, moving closer to Lyra despite the fact that her unveiled energy field made his skin tingle with static electricity. "Some way to convince them that what happened between us isn't contamination or corruption, but something valuable." Lyra's luminous features softened with something that might have been affection. "Marcus, you do not understand what you are suggesting. The collective has spent eons maintaining the purity of our existence. The idea that contact with physical beings could produce something of value rather than degradation is antithetical to everything they believe. They would rather see me destroyed than risk the spread of such thinking to others." The alien fleet began to deploy into attack formation, their ships moving with the coordinated precision of a single vast organism. Marcus realized that he had perhaps minutes before they opened fire or attempted to board his vessel. In that moment, he made a decision that would have seemed insane to him just an hour earlier. Then we fight, he said, his voice carrying the determination that had made him successful as a merchant captain in the dangerous Outer Rim territories. We show them that humanity isn't just another primitive species to be studied and dismissed. We prove that what we have is worth protecting. Rodriguez found his voice at last. Captain, our weapons are civilian-grade mining lasers and defensive screens. We can't fight ships that advanced. Marcus smiled grimly as he activated the ship's communication array. Who said anything about fighting them alone? Park, open a channel on all emergency frequencies. Broadcast our position and situation to every human ship station and colony within range. As Communications Officer Park worked frantically at her station, Marcus turned back to Lyra. You said you were sent to observe humanity and determine whether we were ready for elevation to galactic civilization. What would it take to pass that test? The patterns flowing across Lyra's features shifted into configurations that Marcus was beginning to recognize as deep thought. The test was supposed to measure your species' capacity for growth beyond the limitations of physical existence. Your ability to transcend the petty concerns of material survival and embrace higher forms of consciousness. And what if we could prove that humanity's attachment to physical existence isn't a limitation but a strength? Marcus asked. What if we could show the collective that the bonds between individuals, love, loyalty, sacrifice, create something more powerful than pure energy could achieve alone? Before Lyra could answer, Park's station erupted with incoming signals. The emergency broadcast had reached 17 human vessels in the immediate sector, including 2 heavy cruisers from the Colonial Defense Force and a research expedition that was studying spatial anomalies near the galactic rim. More ships were acknowledging the signal from further out, their estimated arrival times ranging from 30 minutes to several hours. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Captain Sarah Chen of the CDF cruiser Indomitable transmitted first. This is the Colonial Defense Force responding to emergency signal. We are moving to intercept unknown hostile fleet. All civilian vessels are ordered to withdraw to safe distance. But the civilian ships were not withdrawing. The merchant vessel, Lucky Strike, reported that they were rigging their cargo haulers to serve as missile platforms. The research ship Galileo announced that they were deploying experimental sensor arrays that might be able to disrupt alien communication frequencies. Even the small prospecting ships that worked the asteroid belts were converging on their position, their captains volunteering to serve as reconnaissance scouts or decoy targets. Marcus watched the tactical display fill with friendly contacts and felt something swelling in his chest that he had never experienced before. This was what it meant to be human, not the individual survival instinct that drove most species, but the willingness to risk everything for strangers who shared nothing but a common heritage and set of values. They're coming to help, Lyra said, wonder evident in her voice. They do not know me, have no obligation to protect me, yet they are willing to face destruction for the sake of a principle they cannot even fully understand. The first shots from the alien fleet lit up the darkness between stars, beams of coherent energy that passed through normal matter as if it did not exist. But instead of striking the stellar dawn, the attack splashed harmlessly against barriers of twisted space-time that Marcus's instruments couldn't even detect. Lyra had extended her energy field to encompass the entire ship, turning herself into a living shield. I cannot maintain this protection for long, she said, strain visible in the way her features flickered between forms. The energy required to interface with physical matter at this scale will burn out my cohesion matrix in minutes. Marcus activated his ship's intercom system. This is Captain Chen of the merchant vessel, Stellar Dawn. To all human ships responding to our distress call, you are about to witness the first battle between humanity and an alien civilization that considers itself our superior in every way. They believe that what makes us human, our connections to each other, our willingness to sacrifice for strangers, our refusal to abandon those we care about, are primitive weaknesses that make us unworthy of survival. Today, we prove them wrong. As the human fleet took position around the stellar dawn, Marcus looked at Lyra and saw his own determination reflected in her luminous features. "When this is over," he said quietly, "will you still believe that I would stop loving you if I knew what you really are?" Lyra's answer was lost in the roar of weapons fire as the battle for humanity's future began. The battle that followed would later be known as the Luminance Engagement, though no human historian would ever be able to adequately capture the strange beauty and terror of that conflict. The collective's ships moved like living things, flowing through space with impossible grace, while launching attacks that existed in dimensions human science could barely detect. Their weapons passed through armor and shields, as if they were empty air, striking directly at the electromagnetic patterns that maintained ship systems and crew nervous systems. But humanity had advantages that the energy beings had not anticipated, where the collective fought as a unified consciousness, making decisions through consensus that sometimes took precious seconds to achieve. Human captains responded with the chaotic unpredictability of individual minds, making independent choices. The merchant ship, Lucky Strike, performed an impossible maneuver that folded its cargo containers into a projectile formation and launched them at relativistic speeds toward the alien flagship. The research vessel, Galileo, began broadcasting mathematical sequences on frequencies that disrupted the harmonic communication between collective ships. Marcus watched the tactical display with growing amazement as the human fleet demonstrated the very qualities that Lyra had been sent to evaluate. Individual ships made sacrificial runs to protect others. Captains shared tactical data freely even with competitors they had been feuding with for years, and crews worked past the point of exhaustion to keep their vessels functioning under impossible circumstances. The CDF cruiser, Indomitable, had positioned itself between the alien fleet and the civilian ships, absorbing attacks that should have vaporized it instantly. Captain Sarah Chen's voice came through the communication array with calm professionalism, even as her ship's hull began to buckle under the energy bombardment. "All ships, this is Indomitable. We are maintaining position. Civilian vessels continue rescue operations as planned." Marcus realized that somehow, without any formal coordination, the human fleet had organized itself around a single objective. Not victory in the conventional sense, but the protection of the stellar dawn and its mysterious passenger. Ships that had never worked together before were functioning as a unified force, their captains anticipating each other's moves with an intuition that seemed almost telepathic. Lyra stood at the center of the bridge, her energy field extending far beyond the ship's hull to provide protection that defied every law of physics Marcus understood. But he could see the cost of maintaining that shield in the way her form flickered and wavered. The geometric patterns flowing across her features were becoming increasingly erratic, and sometimes her entire body would become transparent for several seconds before solidifying again. "You're burning yourself out," Marcus said, moving to her side despite the electrical discharge that made his hair stand on end. "There has to be another way." "There is," Lyra said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. "But it requires something that has never been attempted in the history of either of our species." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the nature of the battle changed completely. The collective fleet suddenly ceased their attacks and began broadcasting a single harmonic tone that filled space around them with visible distortions. Through these ripples in space-time, new ships began to appear, not the sleek energy constructs of the collective, but vessels that seemed to be made from crystallized light itself. "The Hierarchs," Lyra whispered, and for the first time since revealing her true nature, Marcus heard genuine fear in her voice. the oldest and most powerful of our kind. They have come to witness my judgment personally. The largest of the crystal ships moved with stately deliberation toward the center of the battle. As it approached, its presence seemed to drain color from the stars themselves, leaving only harsh geometric patterns of light and shadow that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, the message bypassed all communication equipment and appeared directly in the minds of every human in the fleet. You have interfered with collective operations. The aberrant unit will be retrieved and processed. Withdraw or be eliminated. The human fleet's response was immediate and unanimous. Every ship, from the massive CDF cruisers to the smallest prospecting vessels, moved closer to the stellar dawn in a protective formation. Captain Sarah Chen's voice cut through the alien transmission with crystal clarity. This is the Colonial Defense Force speaking for all human vessels present. We do not abandon our own. If you want her, you go through us. The Hierarch ship pulsed with patterns of light that seemed to convey emotions too complex for human language. Physical beings cannot comprehend the contamination that has occurred. The aberrant unit has been corrupted by exposure to your primitive emotional constructs. This infection must not be allowed to spread. Marcus stepped forward. Knowing that he was about to attempt something that would either save both their species or doom them all. "Then let us prove that you're wrong," he called out, his voice carrying across the communication array to every ship in both fleets. "Let us show you that what you call contamination is actually evolution." He turned to Lyra, extending his hand toward her energy form. "You said there was something that had never been attempted. Tell me what it is." Lyra's luminous features shifted into an expression of desperate hope. "A permanent fusion between energy and matter consciousness. If successful, it would create something entirely new, a being that exists in both states simultaneously. But the process is dangerous beyond calculation. If it fails, both participants are destroyed utterly. And if it succeeds, then we become living proof that the barriers between our species are not absolute. That evolution can move in directions the collective has never considered." The Hierarch ship began to charge what appeared to be a weapon capable of destroying everything within several light years. Around them, the human fleet prepared for a final desperate assault that they all knew would be futile against beings who could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level. Marcus looked around his bridge at the crew who had become his family over years of dangerous trading runs. Rodriguez was still trying to repair systems that had been damaged by exotic energy effects. Park was maintaining communication links with the rest of the fleet despite equipment that was failing in ways she had never seen before. They were all prepared to die for a principle they barely understood, fighting for the right of two beings from different species to choose their own fate. "Do it," Marcus said to Lyra, taking her hand despite the electrical discharge that made his nerves scream in protest. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The fusion began as a warmth that spread from their joined hands through Marcus's entire body. But it quickly became something far more intense and strange than anything he had experienced. He could feel his consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of his physical form, touching patterns of thought and memory that existed as pure information without material substrate. At the same time, he was aware of Lyra's energy pattern, learning to interface with biological neural networks, creating pathways for experience that had never existed in either of their species. The process was visible to everyone watching as streams of light began to flow between Marcus and Lyra, creating a complex mandala of energy that grew larger and more intricate with each passing second. The pattern expanded beyond the confines of the ship, then beyond the immediate battle area, until it filled the space between the two fleets with geometric forms that pulsed in rhythm with two heartbeats that were becoming synchronized. When the transformation completed, what stood on the bridge of the stellar dawn was neither human nor energy being, but something entirely new. Marcus could still feel his individual thoughts and memories, but they now existed alongside Lyra's vast knowledge and experience in a consciousness that was simultaneously unified and diverse. He retained his physical form, but it was enhanced with capabilities that allowed him to perceive and interact with energy patterns that had been invisible before. The effect on both fleets was immediate and profound. The human ships found their damaged systems spontaneously repairing as beneficial energy patterns flowed outward from the transformed being. Navigation computers began displaying stellar cartography data with precision that exceeded anything in their databases. Weapon systems that had been overloaded by exotic effects came back online with improved efficiency and range, but the reaction from the collective fleet was even more dramatic. Ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly began to break formation as individual energy beings experienced something they had thought impossible: curiosity about what the fused consciousness had achieved. The rigid harmonic communication that had bound them together began to fracture into individual voices asking questions, expressing doubt about long-held beliefs, and demanding to understand what they had just witnessed. The hierarch ship pulsed with patterns that conveyed shock and confusion. "This is impossible. Energy and matter consciousness cannot achieve stable fusion. The fundamental incompatibilities make such union inevitably destructive." Marcus answered, his voice now carrying harmonics that allowed him to speak directly to energy beings while remaining audible to his human crew. "You assumed incompatibility because you never tried to understand what we could offer each other. You saw our physical existence as limitation, but it gave Lyra anchor points for experiences that pure energy cannot achieve. You saw her energy nature as contamination, but it allows me to perceive possibilities that matter-based consciousness cannot imagine alone." The new consciousness that was both Marcus and Lyra, yet somehow more than either, began to demonstrate capabilities that neither species had possessed individually. Complex calculations that would have taken human computers hours to complete were solved instantaneously through energy pattern manipulation. At the same time, the intuitive leaps and creative problem-solving that characterized human thought provided solutions to challenges that had stymied the collective for millennia. Around them, individual ships from both fleets began to approach, their crews and passengers eager to understand what had been accomplished. The rigid battle formations dissolved into something that looked more like a scientific conference, with beings from radically different evolutionary paths sharing data and perspectives for the first time in galactic history. The hierarch ship remained motionless for long moments, its crystalline structure flickering through spectrum changes that suggested intense internal debate. Finally, its transmission came not as an imperious command, but as a question weighted with eons of accumulated certainty that was suddenly no longer certain. "What have you become?" Marcus looked out at the assembled fleets, human and alien, all waiting to learn whether the future would bring cooperation or continued conflict. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, from simple merchant captain to living bridge between species that had never imagined they could understand each other. "We have become what both our species could be if we chose evolution over isolation," he said. "We are proof that love is not contamination but catalyst, that differences are not barriers but opportunities for growth beyond what either could achieve alone." He turned to address both fleets simultaneously, his enhanced consciousness allowing him to communicate on frequencies that every being present could understand. "The question now is whether you will learn from what we have accomplished or whether you will retreat to the safety of what you have always known. The choice, for both our species, is whether to grow together or remain forever apart." In the silence that followed, as ancient certainties crumbled and new possibilities took shape, Marcus felt Lyra's presence within their shared consciousness like warmth and light and infinite patience. She had wondered if he would stop loving her once he knew what she really was. Now, as they faced the future as something that neither human nor energy being had ever been before, he finally had his answer. Love, he had learned, was not diminished by understanding, but transformed by it into something capable of bridging any gap, overcoming any obstacle, and creating possibilities that neither lover could have imagined alone. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love could change not just two hearts, but two entire civilizations, opening pathways to futures that would have remained forever impossible without the courage to risk everything for someone who whispered their deepest fears and trusted you with the truth of what they really were.